Hey, Carolyn, take yourself off mute.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Carolyn Fowler. I'm the Senior Director for Nursing Wellbeing at Johns Hopkins Health System and in the Office of Wellbeing, and I'm delighted to be partnering with my colleague, Dr. Rich Sophia, for this journey. Before we start, please give yourself the gift of 10 minutes of undistracted attention. Minimizing distractions is great for your brain and really good for your well-being. Today, we're returning to the leadership support building block of well-being, and we'll continue our exploration of role modeling that we talked about previously and focus on the practice of showing vulnerability with our colleagues. So last week, Dr. Sophia talked about word choice and talked about the importance of positive word choices or maybe negative word choices. And I think vulnerability may be kind of one of those words that gets in the middle. So I wonder if any of you are wondering why showing vulnerability is an attribute of leaders who support a culture of well-being. If you're completely honest with yourself, and you don't need to disclose this to us right now, what does showing vulnerability feel like to you? Does it feel like a weakness, or does it feel like a strength? Perhaps it's a little of both. Maybe it varies by context. Perhaps you're comfortable being vulnerable with a close friend or family member, but feel more comfortable appearing confident, competent, and in control at work. Perhaps you find emotions challenging to handle, and so it just feels easier and safer to keep your distance. Maybe you're comfortable showing vulnerability with a peer, but you don't want to reveal this to your supervisor. And let's just take a moment now to honor that wherever you are, whatever you feel in this moment about vulnerability. That's your starting point, and that's completely okay. Now, if you haven't heard of Brené Brown, it may be a surprise, but in her 2010 TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability, she talked about vulnerability and sort of rejecting the myth of shame and stigma around vulnerability. This talk has been viewed more than 56 million times. And if you haven't seen it, I'd really encourage you to see it. And Tara will be putting the link to that TED Talk in the chat box. What Brené Brown says that in our culture, we are associating essentially vulnerability with negative emotions. But when we do that, we too often lose sight of the fact that vulnerability is also the birthplace of joy, belonging, creativity, authenticity, and love. So in her work, Dr. Brown has shared multiple myths about vulnerability, but these are probably the big three. The first is that vulnerability is a weakness. And here's the problem with the words we use to describe vulnerability, because some of the words we use to describe it can be interpreted as leadership weaknesses, such as helpless, unsafe, submissive, at risk. And in the very same definition, some of the words they use can be described as authentic leadership strengths, such as being open, unshielded, or unguarded. Now, the second myth is that some people do not experience vulnerability, and that is just plain wrong. The question is, what do we do with it? We all experience it. Do we allow, though, the shame of vulnerability to silence us or restrict the way we interact at work? Or do we lean into our courage even when we can't predict or control the outcome? In her book, Daring to Lead in 2018, Brown writes that there is no courage without experiencing vulnerability. If we don't think there's something to lose, then it's not an act of courage to lean into it. The third myth is that vulnerability requires that we fully disclose or expose our secrets. A common misunderstanding about showing vulnerability is that we have to be completely an open book, that we have to disclose really personal and private things, or grant people an unrestricted view into our life. And that, my friends, is just not true. Vulnerability requires us to have us show up in our interactions as our authentic selves, but it's okay. And it's actually appropriate for us to have some boundaries when we're showing some vulnerability in a professional setting. The courage to show up as our authentic selves is, of course, a leadership strength. Simon Sinek puts it this way: a leader first and foremost is human, And only when we have the strength to show our vulnerability can we truly lead. So let's think for a moment about our work as leaders. Would we be able to accomplish any of it without the relationships we develop with other people? When we establish a vulnerable human to human being relationship, that feels very different than what I call a job description to job description relationship. As human beings, we are wired to resonate with people that we read as authentic. We know there's a difference between a leader's image and their real self because we feel it. That difference is a feeling of authentic connection to others. This, of course, connects to our conversation in session 10 about building a sense of community and emotional connection. When I don't feel I'm connecting to the real you, I'm less likely to trust you. But how do we tell the difference between a leader's real self and their professional image? I took this picture in October when this leaf caught my eye, not because it was perfect or because it was exactly where it was supposed to be, but because it wasn't. Its imperfection was what caught my eye and drew me to it. I connected to it with interest and curiosity. Now, we all know that in nature, perfection doesn't feel natural because it isn't natural. But we spot fake perfection in nature and in people. So it's only when we give ourselves permission as leaders to remove any illusion of invulnerable perfection that we can show up as our true selves with all our gifts and challenges. So let's move now to the how-tos. How can I show vulnerability? And look, this may be easier for some of us than others. The first is to be authentic. Allow yourself to be human. It's exhausting to show up as someone you're not. Allow the people you lead to see the real you, not a curated or carefully managed version of the ideal you. Embrace opportunities to learn and grow, try something new, or sit with uncertainty for a while. Be curious. Really be curious and be genuinely curious about ideas, feelings, people. Acknowledge your need for support. And that support could be feedback, help, guidance, partnership, etc. And be willing to stay present with people when they're experiencing challenges. This applies to you too. Notice if you're discounting your own feelings. And then show empathy. Be kind, be interested, be non-judgmental, and above all, listen. Now, here's a vulnerable leader checklist that I actually found. I adapted it, but it may actually be interesting to you as you think about guiding your practice of showing vulnerability. So one of the tips is, am I giving the people I lead the opportunity to get to know and understand me? Am I being my authentic self with people? And how does that feel to me and to them? Am I open and honest with myself and others about my areas of needed growth and development? Have I asked for and welcomed feedback so that I can improve? Am I including others as part of the solution rather than always problem solving by myself? Do I take responsibility if something goes wrong? And am I looking day by day for opportunities to show vulnerability? And above all, please be kind to yourself as you practice, because this is a journey. Now, both the tips I have for you this week are for you, because I'd encourage you to start this practice gently, especially if it's unfamiliar. Tip number 15 relates to developing self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Notice and name your emotions as they come and go during your workday. If you're feeling them, other people may be noticing them too. And then practice opening up with a trusted colleague or friend. Share your hopes, fears, challenges, excitement. Notice how that feels. I'd like to share these lines from Leonard Cohen's song Anthem as encouragement to show vulnerability. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Let's carry that thought with us. So this is the last of our 10-minute tips for 2021. Dr. Sophia, the Healthy at Hopkins team, and I wish you happy, healthy holidays, and we look forward to reconnecting with you on January the 5th. We will be talking on January the 5th about building trust. I'll be doing that with you. And before we wrap today, please take a moment to answer the 2 questions that Tara has put in the chat box for you. Finally, as always, please contact us. We encourage you to use our resources. Let us know if there's something that's missing. And thank you so much for taking time to be with us.